Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Smith. I'm 60 years old, and at 3:07 a.m. on the 14th floor of a beachfront hotel in Waikiki, my stepson kicked in my door. What broke first wasn't the wood. It was the illusion I'd been living under for years, that if I stayed calm, paid quietly, and smoothed things over, the chaos would eventually burn itself out. That night taught me something different. It taught me that entitlement doesn't fade with patience. It grows. And when it finally shows itself, it does so loudly, violently, and without apology. The man who kicked that door believed he deserved what was on the other side simply because he wanted it. The woman standing behind him believed it was my job to make the problem disappear. And I understood in that narrow hotel hallway filled with air conditioning hum and spilled rage that whatever happened next would follow me home. Into my marriage, into my reputation, into my future. The consequences wouldn't be loud or dramatic. They'd be quiet, procedural, and permanent. And by the time the night was over, the person who kicked that door would no longer get to decide how the story ended. If you've ever been told to just let it go so someone else wouldn't have to change, stay with me. And if stories about quiet strength, hard boundaries, and consequences that don't need shouting matter to you, consider liking this video, subscribing, or leaving a comment. Sometimes the smallest decisions carry the longest shadows. The hallway outside my room was silent in that particular hotel way, thick carpet, swallowing sound lights dimmed low enough to feel intentional, the distant mechanical sigh of an elevator somewhere far down the corridor. Then Jake Brooks filled it with noise, drunk breath, anger, a sense of ownership he hadn't earned. I want that room. Now he shouted like he owned the entire floor. Jake was 28, loud not tough, the kind of man who mistook being indulged for being respected. He wore board shorts and a cheap black tank top, something bought from a tourist shop earlier that day. His eyes were red, unfocused. I could smell beer, something sugary, and the sharp bite of tequila, the kind of smell that announces trouble before a single word is spoken. Behind him stood my wife, Karen, barefoot, wrapped in a hotel robe. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot that told me she'd been dragged out of sleep, but her face wasn't worried. It was pinched, annoyed, and not at him. "Richard," she said, using the tone she saved for moments when she wanted compliance without confrontation. "Don't make this worse. Just switch rooms. He's upset. Upset." Like a grown man kicking down a door in the middle of the night was a mood swing. I looked at the broken latch. The wood had split clean where Jake's foot had connected. A thin sliver of oak hung loose, trembling slightly every time the door shifted on its hinges. The sound it had made when it burst inward still rang somewhere behind my ribs. It wasn't fear that froze me in place. It was recognition. A line had been crossed, one I'd spent years trying to keep straight in a marriage that always asked me to bend. "This is our room," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm, too flat, like I was listening to someone else speak. Jake's mouth twisted into a grin. Not anymore. Karen finally looked at me then. Her eyes held that familiar mix of pressure and pity, the look that said, "Be the bigger man," the look that translated to "Pay the price so we can all pretend this is normal." "Don't be selfish over a bed," she added softly. Selfish. The word landed harder than the kick. Because it wasn't about the bed. It was about the flights I'd paid for, the rent Jake never quite managed to cover, the temporary loans that never came back, the pattern of behavior that always ended with me absorbing the damage so everyone else could move on without consequences. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I stood there in my t-shirt and pajama shorts, the cool air brushing my legs, feeling the floor steady beneath my feet while everything else tilted. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened. A man's head appeared briefly, eyes narrowed in curiosity, then disappeared again. A latch clicked. Silence returned. No one wanted to be involved. I looked again at the doorframe. Damage, liability, forced entry. My mind did what it had been trained to do for decades. I'd spent 30 years as a claims auditor reading reports from hurricanes and kitchen fires, slip and falls, and accidents people swore weren't their fault. I knew how this worked. Cameras, incident reports, registration details. Paper didn't care about emotions. Without a word, I walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer. I took out my small black notebook, the one I'd carried since the 80s, and my silver cross pen, a gift from my father years ago. I clicked it once and began to write. 3:07 a.m., Jake Brooks kicked door, forced entry, Karen present. Jake blinked at me. "What are you doing remembering?" I said. Karen's brows pulled together. "Richard, don't do that. She hated when I got quiet, when I got procedural. Emotion was something she could steer. Documentation wasn't." Jake stepped forward, chest puffed out. "Move! I'm taking the room!" For a brief moment, I considered all the things I could do. I could grab him by the collar. I could shout. I could give the hallway a story it would remember. And for about 10 seconds, it would feel satisfying. Then I thought about the cameras, about how quickly a man my age becomes the villain if there's no proof, about how stories change when they're told by people who've never had to pay for the truth. I stepped back, not because I was giving in, because I was stepping out. "Fine," I said. Jake's face lit up with smug relief. Karen exhaled, grateful not to me but to the fact that she wouldn't have to choose. I closed my notebook, capped the pen, and felt something settle inside my chest. This wasn't surrender. It was the moment the record began. I picked up my suitcase and turned toward the hallway, leaving the broken door behind me open, splintered and already telling a story that wasn't finished yet. I rolled the suitcase into the hallway, the wheels sounding louder than they should have against the thick carpet. The door to the room I'd just left hung open behind me, tilted slightly on its hinges, the broken latch exposed like a bone. Jake was already inside, laughing to himself as if he'd claimed a prize. Karen stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me go, arms folded tight across her chest. "Where are you going?" she asked, as if the answer might inconvenience her. "Somewhere with a lock," I said. Her mouth fell open, not in concern but in offense, the kind you feel when someone refuses to play the role you've assigned them. She started to say my name again, Rick. That familiar pull meant to slow me down, but I didn't wait. I turned toward the elevators and walked. The hallway lights were dim and yellowed, set low to keep guests calm. The calm felt artificial, almost insulting. I pressed the call button and stood there with my suitcase upright beside me, my hand resting on the handle. The hotel was quiet in that in-between hour, too late for night, too early for morning. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, the doors sliding open like nothing in the world was wrong. As it descended, the floor numbers ticked down in steady order. 14, 13, 12. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't take it out. I already knew who it was. By the time I reached the lobby, the adrenaline had burned off, leaving behind something steadier. The chandeliers were dimmed, their light reflected faintly off the marble floor. A couple dozed on a sofa near the elevators, their sandals kicked off, heads leaned together in exhausted symmetry. Somewhere behind the front desk, a printer hummed, then stopped. The night clerk looked up as I approached. He was young, maybe mid-20s, uniform, pressed sharp eyes, alert in a way that told me he'd already seen several versions of this story. He didn't ask why I was checking out at 4 in the morning. He just straightened and smiled. "Good morning, sir." I set my suitcase upright beside me. "I need to make a change to my account." "Yes, sir. I need to split the folio," I said slowly and clearly. "Effective immediately." He blinked once, not confused, just recalibrating. "Certainly." "May I have your room number 1402, I said. "But starting now, that room is no longer tied to my card." His fingers paused above the keyboard. "Sir, are you checking out?" "Yes. And the remaining guests will handle their own charges." He nodded, professional to the bone. "One moment." I watched the screen from a respectful distance. You learn how to do that when you've spent a career reading reports without interfering. I could see the cursor move fields, populate names, dates, authorization codes, the quiet machinery of accountability coming online. "May I confirm," he said, glancing up, "that all future incidentals for room 1402 should be removed from your authorization?" "That's correct. And damages, that's also correct." He hesitated just for a fraction of a second. "Sir, there was a—" "I'm aware," I said. "That's why I'm here." He nodded again and typed for another minute before sliding a form across the counter. Please review and sign. I read it carefully. Timestamp, authorization removed, responsibility transferred, clean, proper. I signed and handed it back. As I did, something loosened in my chest, not relief, exactly, more like alignment, like a joint slipping back into place after being out of position for too long. Thank you, the clerk said. If you need assistance with transportation to the airport, I can arrange that. I'll manage, I said. Outside, the air was warm and heavy, carrying the scent of salt and flowers and something faintly sour from a dumpster nearby. Hawaii smelled different at that hour, honest in a way daylight sometimes isn't. The valet stand was empty, but an Uber pulled up within minutes. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk and slid into the back seat. As we pulled away, I looked up at the hotel, 14 floors of light and glass stacked neatly against the night sky. Somewhere up there, Karen and Jake were probably celebrating, already rewriting the story in their heads. Richard gave in. Richard always gives in. My phone buzzed again. A text this time. Where are you going? I turned the screen face down. The driver chatted about traffic and early flights. I nodded at the right moments, my thoughts drifting backward through the years like a slow reel. Jake at 16 slamming doors in our house, Karen asking me to be patient. Jake at 22 calling from a tow lot because his car had been impounded. Jake at 26 swearing this time would be different. Each time Karen had said the same thing. He's trying, don't push him. And each time I'd paid in money and silence and dignity. At the airport, the quiet continued. A few red-eyed travelers hunched over coffee. A janitor pushed a mop across tile that shone under fluorescent lights. I printed my boarding pass and sat at the gate with my suitcase between my feet. I took out my notebook again and added another line. 4:21 a.m. left property. Folio split. My phone buzzed once more. A voicemail. Karen's voice came through tight and annoyed. This is ridiculous, she said. Jake's just drunk. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Call me. I turned the phone face down and left it there. When boarding was announced, I took a window seat. As the plane lifted off, the lights of Waikiki stretched and scattered, then disappeared into black. I watched until there was nothing left to see. Somewhere over the Pacific, my phone vibrated again. Another voicemail. This one sharper. You can't just abandon us, Karen said. You're acting like a child. I closed my eyes and breathed until the engines became a steady roar instead of pressure in my skull. I loosened my collar and reminded myself to drink water. By the time we touched down back on the mainland, one thing was clear. I wasn't leaving out of anger. I was leaving because the paperwork was finished and what came next would follow its own rules. By the time I stepped out of the airport, the air felt heavier, cooler, familiar. The kind of weight that tells you you're home whether you want to be or not. I drove straight past my house, the suitcase still riding in the trunk, like it didn't trust me to stop. The city was waking up around me. Delivery trucks backing into alleys with sharp beeps, a bakery unlocking its doors, steam fogging the windows. Normal life moving on schedule. I pulled into the parking lot of my office instead. The building was nothing special. Low brick, narrow windows, the kind of place people never notice unless they need something fixed. I unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and set my suitcase beside my desk. The smell hit me the same way it always did, coffee, toner, old carpet. Muscle memory. I hung my jacket, rolled my sleeves up, and sat down. This was the part I understood. When your life starts to feel crooked, straight lines help. Forms, dates, authorizations. I'd spent decades separating facts from feelings for other people. I knew how to do it for myself, even if I'd avoided it for years. I opened my laptop and pulled up the reservation details I still had saved. Names, dates, rates, the room number. Everything looked orderly, polite. It always does on paper. I didn't linger. I wasn't here to argue with a screen. I was here to begin untangling. My phone buzzed. I didn't look. I already knew the rhythm. First confusion, then irritation, then pressure. If I waited long enough, it would turn into blame. I opened my notebook and wrote another line, not because I needed it, but because the act itself kept me honest. Returned mainland. Financial separation begins. The phrase surprised me with how final it sounded. I capped the pen and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. There was no rush of victory, no spike of anger, just a steady, uncomfortable clarity, the kind that doesn't ask permission. After a while, I stood and drove to the bank. The teller knew me by name. Same smile, same question about whether I wanted my usual. I nodded and slid my card across the counter. I need to put a temporary hold on one account, I said. She didn't ask why. She just typed, nodded, and turned the screen so I could confirm. Dates, limits. A simple barrier where there hadn't been one before. I signed and handed the pen back. My phone lit up again as I stood there. A text this time. The hotel says Jake has to pay for the door. Fix this. I stared at the words longer than I needed to. Not because they surprised me, but because they were so familiar. The expectation baked into them. That I would step in, smooth it over, absorb the cost so no one else would have to feel it. I slipped the phone into my pocket without answering. Back in my car, I sat with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. For years, I'd thought keeping the peace meant endurance. That being steady was the same thing as being strong. But endurance has a limit. And once you pass it, what looks like patience from the outside starts to feel like erosion from within. I drove home then. The house was quiet when I walked in, exactly how I'd left it. I set the suitcase by the door and didn't unpack. Some part of me needed to know I could leave again if I had to. On the kitchen table, my phone buzzed. Another message. Karen's name. I turned it face down. I made coffee, the good kind I'd always told myself was too expensive, and stood at the counter waiting for it to finish. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Small, steady sounds. The kind you don't notice when everything else is loud. I sat down and opened my laptop again, this time pulling up my list of automatic payments, subscriptions, shared accounts, things that had accumulated quietly over years of compromise. I didn't cancel everything. Not yet. I marked them, flagged them, made notes. This wasn't about punishment. It was about visibility. You can't fix what you refuse to see. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification. I ignored it and kept working, one line at a time, one boundary at a time. The work wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast, but it was clean. When I finally closed the laptop, the light outside had shifted. Late afternoon sliding toward evening. I looked around the kitchen, the house, the quiet. This was the space where things would either fall apart or finally line up. I didn't know yet which it would be. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for permission to find out. I drove to the office the next morning instead of settling in at home. Not because I needed to work, but because routine has a way of steadying things when your personal life starts to feel untethered. The building was quiet at that hour. Lights still off in half the suites, the hum of the HVAC filling the spaces between footsteps. I set my briefcase down, powered up my computer, and sat there for a moment without opening anything. This wasn't about escalation. It was about documentation. I pulled up the hotel reservation again, not to argue with it, but to understand it the way I would any other file. Room number, dates, names attached to the booking. There it was, plain and unadorned, my name, Karen's name. No third party listed at the time of booking. I'd noticed it before, half aware the way you notice a detail without assigning it weight. Now it mattered. I drafted an email to the hotel's risk management department. Not angry, not accusatory, clean and factual. I requested preservation of security footage from the hallway outside room 1402 during the early morning hours. I asked for a copy of any incident report filed in relation to property damage. I included my confirmation number and signed my name. Then I waited. While I waited, my phone rang. Karen. I let it go to voicemail. Another call followed, then another. I didn't block her. Blocking creates noise of its own. Silence, when used correctly, lets the system work. Mid-morning, an unfamiliar number came through. I answered. Mr. Smith, a man said, his voice careful, professional. This is Michael Alvarez, Assistant Operations Manager at the Hilton in Waikiki. Yes, I said. I'm calling to follow up regarding the incident earlier this week. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the ceiling. Go on. "We've completed our initial documentation," he said. "There's a question regarding responsibility for the damage." There it was. Not a threat, not a favor, a classification. "I want to confirm," he continued, "that you are no longer authorizing charges associated with room 1402. That's correct." There was a pause, paper shifting on his end. "Thank you for clarifying. That changes how the incident is processed." "How so?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "The individual involved in the forced entry," he said, choosing his words with care, "was not listed as a registered guest at the time of booking." I didn't speak. I let him continue. "As a result," he went on, "the damage is being classified as vandalism by an unregistered individual, not a guest accident. Responsibility does not attach to the primary cardholder." "I understand," I said. "We'll proceed accordingly," he said. "You'll receive a copy of the incident report once it's finalized. Please do." When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, hands folded on the desk. There was no satisfaction in it, no sense of triumph, just confirmation, the kind that settles into your bones and stays there. My email chimed. "Risk Management Incident Documentation Room 1402. I opened the attachment. Timestamps, staff statements, damage assessment. A brief note indicating security footage showed a male subject forcing entry into the room. No mention of provocation. No mention of a struggle. Just facts. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from Jake this time. "You think you're smart? You can't just leave us like that." I didn't reply. I forwarded the report to my personal email, printed a copy, and slid it into a manila folder. On the tab, I wrote one word: Waikiki. Another call came in. Karen again. I answered this one. "What did you do?" she demanded, skipping hello entirely. "I did exactly what I said I would," I replied. "They're saying Jake has to pay for everything she said. The door, security, all of it. He doesn't have that kind of money." "That's not my problem," I said, and the ease of the words surprised me. "You're punishing him." "No," I said. "I'm stopping." She went quiet. I could hear her breathing fast and shallow. "You always hide behind paperwork," she said finally. "I hide behind the truth," I said. "There's a difference." She hung up. I looked down at the folder on my desk, the neat lines of text inside. This wasn't revenge. It was consequence. The system doing what it was designed to do once the right information was in place. Outside my window, traffic moved steadily past. Ordinary people going about ordinary days. I knew the ripples from this would spread through family, through church, through the quiet networks of shared stories that make up a town. But for the first time, I wasn't trying to outrun them. I closed the folder and slid it into a drawer. What came next would be louder, more personal, more emotional. But the facts were set now, and facts once established have a way of carrying themselves forward without asking for permission. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, each one slightly different, each one assuming I'd eventually bend the way I always had before. Karen called first. Not to ask how I was, not to talk about what happened, to negotiate. "This has gotten out of hand," she said, her voice tight, controlled. "The hotel is overreacting. Jake was drunk. You know he didn't mean to break anything." "I know he kicked a door in," I said. "Intentionally." "That's not the point," she snapped. "The point is, this doesn't need to follow him. You have connections. You understand how these things work." I did understand how they worked. That was the problem. "This isn't about connections," I said. "It's about responsibility." She sighed, long and dramatic. "You're acting like this is some moral stand. It's a door, Richard. One night, one mistake. One mistake doesn't look like this," I said. "It looks like accountability." She went quiet, then shifted tactics. "You're embarrassing us," she said. "People are talking. At church, at work. Do you know what this makes us look like? That word again? Us." "I didn't break the door," I said, "and I didn't lie about it." "You didn't have to escalate it," she insisted. "You could have handled it quietly." I closed my eyes for a moment. Quietly. That was always the ask. Keep it quiet. Keep it contained. Keep paying so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. "I handled it correctly," I said. "That's not the same thing." The next call came an hour later. "Jake." He didn't bother with hello. You think you're clever? He snapped, his voice sharp and breathy like he'd been pacing. Running away, locking accounts, leaving us to clean up your mess. My mess, I asked. You left, he said. You humiliated us. You made this worse. I let the silence stretch. Silence has weight when you don't rush to fill it. You owe me, he continued, his voice rising. You married my mom. You signed up for this. You've always paid. There it was. Not anger, expectation. I didn't sign up to lie, I said. And I didn't agree to cover for you. You're threatening me, he shot back. No, I said calmly. I'm informing you. He laughed, brittle and forced. You think a few papers mean something? I told them what happened. I told them you came at me. That's unfortunate, I said. What's that supposed to mean? It means there's video, I replied, and reports, and timestamps, and none of them match what you're saying. The laughter stopped. Karen's voice cut in closer to the phone now. Richard, please. He didn't understand what he was doing. Can't you just help us straighten this out, help? That word had carried me through years of quiet concessions. I won't be part of anything that isn't true, I said. Not with my name attached to it, not with my career. Jake exploded. You're accusing me of fraud. I'm saying I won't lie for you, I said. There's a difference. Something slammed in the background. Karen started crying sharp and sudden, the sound that used to undo me every time. You're tearing this family apart, she said through it. No, I said quietly. I'm stopping it from tearing me apart. The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment after the call ended, the phone still warm in my hand. My chest felt tight, not panic, but a warning. The kind you listen to when you've learned the cost of ignoring it. An email came in a few minutes later. Notice of intent. Thinly worded. Vague accusations. Emotional distress. Financial harm. The kind of message meant to scare more than convince. I read it twice, then forwarded it to my work account and added it to the Waikiki folder. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was tired. Tired of being told silence was maturity. Tired of paying to keep other people comfortable. Tired of pretending that avoiding conflict was the same thing as doing the right thing. I opened my notebook and wrote one more line. 6:42 p.m. legal threat received. No response sent. I capped the pen and set it down. Outside, the sky was turning that dull gray that settles in without drama. A garage door rattled shut somewhere down the block. Ordinary life continuing. I knew this wasn't over. The ripples were already moving outward, touching places I hadn't planned on touching. Work, church, community, the spaces where stories grow legs. But for the first time, I wasn't trying to stop them. And if you've ever found yourself in a moment like that, quiet, exhausted, choosing truth over peace, I'd be curious to know what you would have done. By the time Karen and Jake flew back, the story had already started walking around without them. That's how it works in a place like this. You don't have to announce anything. You just stop correcting people and the truth finds its own shoes. I noticed it first at the grocery store. I was standing in the coffee aisle staring at rows of labels that all promised the same thing when someone said my name like they weren't sure they should. Richard. I turned. It was Robert Klein, from church retired machinist, late 60s, a man I'd sat 3 pews away from for years without exchanging more than a nod. His eyes were soft, curious, in a careful way. Morning, I said. Morning, he replied. Then, after a pause that told me everything, Karen's back. Yes, I said. Rough trip, he asked, not prying, just offering space. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the folded incident report. I handed it to him without commentary. He read it slowly, jaw tightening, not in anger, but recognition. When he handed it back, he didn't say much. Well, he said, finally, that's something. Sorry you had to deal with it. Thank you, I said. That was it. No gossip, no judgment, just acknowledgement. And by noon, a text came in from a number I hadn't seen in years. You did the right thing. Signed with a name I recognized from the VFW auxiliary. The ripples were spreading. Karen came home that evening. She dropped her suitcase just inside the door and stood there like the house didn't quite belong to her anymore. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, clean, quiet, orderly. The way she used to say made her feel unseen. "We need to talk," she said. "We will," I replied. "After dinner." She scoffed. "You're acting like this is normal." I looked at her. Really looked. She looked older than she had in Waikiki. Worn down, not defiant, now frayed. "This is normal," I said. "What happened there wasn't." She followed me into the living room, arms crossed tight across her chest. "Do you know what people are saying?" she asked. "The church board called. They asked about the travel fund." The words landed quietly, but they landed. "What travel fund?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked toward the window. "The one for the youth retreat," she said finally. "Some of the money was used for the Hawaii trip, temporarily. Jake was supposed to pay it back." I sat down slowly. "How much?" I asked. She shook her head. "Richard, don't do this." "How much?" I repeated. "4,200, she whispered. I exhaled through my nose. Not loud, just steady. "And whose name was on that account?" I asked. She didn't need to answer. We both knew. I stood, walked to the desk, and opened the drawer where the Waikiki folder sat. I took out the incident report and laid it on the table between us. "I'm not covering this," I said. Her face crumpled. "You're leaving me to deal with all of it." "No," I said. "I'm letting you deal with it." She cried, then loud, shaking sobs that used to undo me every time. Not this time. That night I slept in the guest room. The bed was smaller. The pillow smelled faintly of laundry soap and dust. I slept anyway. The next day the consequences widened. Jake's employer called Karen about his behavior during company leave. A rumor surfaced at the diner about a vacation incident. The church scheduled an emergency meeting about the fund. I didn't attend. Instead, I went to my office and waited. Thursday afternoon, an email came in from the mediation center downtown. Mandatory attendance requested. Karen had initiated it. I printed the email and slid it into the folder. That evening, there was a knock at the door. It was James Porter from 2 houses down holding a 6-pack of root beer. "Figured you might need company," he said. We sat on the porch as the sun went down, not talking much, just watching the streetlights come on. "You okay?" he asked eventually. "I am," I said, and realized it was true. He nodded. "Sometimes stopping is the hardest thing." I looked at the front door, solid locked. I thought about the one in Waikiki, how easily it had broken. I knew the next step would be public. I knew it would hurt. But I also knew something else. I wasn't alone anymore. The story had moved out of the hallway and into daylight where it couldn't be rearranged so easily. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to shield anyone from what that meant. The days between the email from the mediation center and the actual date on the calendar stretched longer than I expected. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because everything did quietly, steadily, without asking my permission. That's how consequences really work. They don't arrive with sirens. They show up as phone calls you didn't expect, pauses in conversations that used to flow, names spoken a little more carefully than before. Karen didn't come home the night after the church meeting. She texted to say she was staying with a friend. I replied with a simple, "Okay," no questions, no follow-up. I put the phone face down on the table and left it there. Silence, once you stop being afraid of it, becomes a kind of shelter. At work, I noticed the shift first in the smallest ways. A colleague lingered in my doorway longer than usual, then asked how I was doing instead of what I was working on. Another avoided my eyes entirely. News travels fast in a town this size, especially when it doesn't need embellishment. All I had done was stop correcting people. The facts were enough. Jake tried once more. A late-night voicemail, his voice unsteady, anger and panic tangled together. He accused me of ruining everything, of choosing paperwork over family, of making things public that didn't need to be. I didn't call back. I listened once, then deleted it. The mediation appointment sat on my calendar like a marker you don't cross until you have to. Date, time, location, neutral ground, mandatory attendance. I printed the notice and added it to the folder, sliding it in behind the incident report and the bank confirmations. The folder was getting thicker now, not with arguments, but with records. At home, I began the slow work of separating things. Not aggressively, not all at once. I canceled a shared subscription here, changed an authorization there, redirected statements. Each action small enough to seem harmless on its own, but together they formed a line that didn't bend. Karen came by one afternoon to pick up clothes. She moved through the house like a guest, careful not to touch too much. We didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue about. When she reached the door, she turned back once. "You don't have to do this in front of everyone," she said quietly. "You're making it worse." "I'm not making it public," I replied. "I'm letting it be accurate." She studied my face like she was looking for something she used to recognize. Then she left without saying anything else. That night, I sat at my desk and went through the folder again. Not because I needed to memorize it, but because repetition has a way of calming the nerves. I arranged the documents in order. Timeline first, evidence second, communications last. I added tabs, dates, notes in the margins. Nothing emotional, nothing speculative, just what happened. I thought about how strange it was that this quiet preparation felt more honest than all the years I'd spent trying to be accommodating. Back then, I'd thought keeping things private meant keeping them safe. I'd been wrong. Privacy without truth is just another place for things to rot. The night before the mediation, I didn't sleep much. Not from fear, but from awareness. I lay there listening to the house settle the pipes, clicking the distant sound of a car passing on the street. I thought about the room in Waikiki, the broken door, the way Jake had smiled when he thought he'd won something. I also thought about what would happen next. Not just in that room downtown, but afterward. What people would say, what they would assume, what they would stop assuming once the facts were laid out where no one could move them around. Public consequence doesn't mean humiliation. It means visibility. In the morning, I dressed carefully, not formally, respectfully. I placed the folder in my briefcase, my notebook beside it, pen clipped neatly at the top. Everything had its place. When your life starts to shift, order becomes an anchor. Before I left, I stood for a moment in the hallway looking at the front door. Solid, undamaged, locked the way a door is supposed to be. I rested my hand against it, not for reassurance, but for acknowledgement. This was the last quiet moment before things would be said out loud. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold. I didn't need to. All I needed was already in that folder. The rest would take care of itself. The mediation room smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, the kind of place designed to make people talk without feeling important. It sat on the second floor of a brick building across from the courthouse, a flag in the corner that had clearly seen better decades. I arrived 10 minutes early. Not strategy, just habit. I sat at the long table and set my briefcase down square with the edge. The folder went in front of me. My notebook to the right. The pen on top. Straight lines help when everything else feels tilted. Karen came in first. She looked like she'd dressed for a job interview. Navy blazer, low heels, hair pulled back tight. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then away. Jake followed a few minutes later, late shoulders hunched forward like he was already bracing for a fight. He dropped into a chair without looking at me, arms crossed, jaw working. The mediator introduced herself, explained the rules, asked for respect. Jake didn't wait for her to finish. He left us, he snapped, locked us out of money, humiliated us in Hawaii and back home. That's what this is about. She turned to me. "Mr. Smith." I didn't answer right away. I opened the folder. Inside were copies, incident report, time-stamped, folio change, bank confirmations, and the statement from the hotel manager. I laid them out one by one, slow enough for everyone to see. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to clarify what happened." Jake laughed, sharp and ugly. "You think waving papers around makes you right?" I looked at him. Really looked. Sweat at his temples. Restless leg bouncing under the table. "Let's start with the timeline," I said, sliding the first page forward. 3:07 a.m. security footage shows Jake Brooks in the hallway outside room 1402. He kicks the door. The door breaks inward. No one else touches it. That's not how Jake started. "I'm not finished," I said calmly. The mediator raised a hand toward him. He leaned back, scowling. At 3:09, I continued. The front desk receives a noise complaint. At 3:13, security arrives. At 3:15, damage is documented. I paused. At 3:17, I exit the room with my suitcase. Karen stared at the table. I slid the next document forward. This is the guest registration. My name, Karen's name, original booking time. Jake's name is not listed. That doesn't mean anything. Jake snapped. It means everything I said, turning to the mediator. Responsibility follows registration. I placed the incident report on top. This classifies the damage as vandalism by an unregistered individual, not a guest accident. Jake stood so fast, his chair scraped loudly across the floor. You planned this, he shouted. You wanted me to get screwed. Please sit down, the mediator said firmly. You ruined my life, Jake yelled, pointing at me. You could have paid. You always paid. The room went quiet. That sentence hung there heavier than anything else he'd said. I closed the folder and folded my hands on top of it. No, I said. I didn't ruin your life. I stopped paying for your mistakes. Jake's mouth opened, then closed. His face flushed red. There's a difference, I added. The mediator cleared her throat. There's also a statement from hotel staff regarding your account of events. She read aloud, voice even. Review of footage did not support the claim of a physical altercation. Jake laughed too loud. They're lying, she continued. Further, the guest requested documentation for a personal claim unrelated to property damage. Karen looked up sharply. What claim? It's nothing, Jake muttered. I looked at Karen. This is what I meant, I said quietly. This is why I stepped away. After a moment, the mediator spoke again. Based on the documentation, responsibility for the damages rests with Mr. Brooks. Mr. Smith is not obligated to cover these costs. Jake let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Karen whispered my name. I stood. This is where my involvement ends, I said. Financially, legally, emotionally. As I reached the door, Jake called after me. You think this makes you strong? I didn't turn around. I think it makes me free. The house felt different after that. Not empty, just settled like dust after furniture's been moved. Karen didn't come home that night. We spoke later calmly. No shouting, no accusations. We both understood there was no fixing what had been crossed and denied. The divorce was clean. Dates, signatures, final transfers that felt more like relief than loss. A few weeks later, I sat with my retirement planner. Same office, same framed photos on the desk. He tapped numbers into his calculator, then smiled. With these changes, you could step back earlier than we planned. How much earlier, I asked. 4, maybe 5 years. I thought about that. Mornings without tension, evenings without waiting for the next crisis. Time bought not with overtime, but with the decision to stop paying for chaos. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat in my living room with a cup of good black coffee. The house was silent except for the tick of the wall clock. Outside, the neighborhood moved at its usual pace. Lawns getting mowed, a dog barking 2 houses down. I looked at my front door, solid locked the way a door is supposed to be. For years, I'd confused peace with endurance. I thought being a good man meant absorbing whatever came my way and smiling through it. I was wrong. Peace has a cost. So does silence. The difference is who pays it. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been asked to stay quiet while someone keeps kicking at your boundaries, you're allowed to stop. You're allowed to close the door. And if you'd like to support stories like this, stories about quiet strength and hard choices, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't fighting back. It's choosing not to pay anymore.